we made 142K in 4 days. And I guess the most surprising thing is that because, for the previous it took me 18 months to make my first dollar. And then the next year was around 100K. So to kind of double your business revenue in 4 days was absolutely wild.
Kieran, welcome to the podcast. Honored and grateful to have you here. Very excited to dive into you, your story, and just have a great chat here today, man.
Absolute pleasure to be here, dude. Like I was saying, I'm an avid listener, so it's really nice to be on the other side of the equation.
And you said you started listening to me and Tej when we first put out episode 1. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I just started creating content, and Tej, obviously, writer, Twitter. I found it really interesting, and then that's where I found you from episode 1, and so we sort of originated around the same time, and it's just been crazy to watch you put in so many reps on one thing, so I really admire it.
Yeah, man. Well, likewise to you with writing, and it's really cool to see that whole journey unfold for you. But before we get into writing, I'm curious to dive into military boarding school. How did that impact you and your journey?
I love one thing I love about you is your research, man. Military boarding school, yeah. So I went to military school when I was 12 years old. So for people in terms of what that's like, if you've seen Malcolm in the Middle, it's a bit like that, but slightly less extreme. And there were pros and cons. So one of the main positives is routine and discipline. Particularly as a creator, right? Because when you're your own boss, one of the hardest parts is keeping yourself in check. And so I'm still very disciplined and routined in that respect. The adverse reaction is I have a big disdain for authority now because, we were kids and it just seems very surreal looking back because, there's these grown adults shouting at us when we're like 13, 14, making us march at like crazy times and bad weather. And then I came out of it and was like, you know what? I don't really like listening to people so much. And, that's gone really well on the internet side. It's kind of got worse and worse. But those are probably the two main things that have come from it.
So the consistency and the discipline and the lack of appeal to authority are the things that stand out for you.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think that's a common theme you notice with creators, with people who put stuff out on the internet, is they have such a desire to do things consistently because that's how you get progress. But then it's also like they don't want to be told what to do. And it's interesting how those two things like coexist in the world almost. And so for you, what was the moment you realized like, oh, wow, like I really do want to be putting stuff out on the internet?
I wouldn't say there was a pivotal moment, more a gradual realization. I finished university as a dentist and I never really enjoyed the career. And there were just moments, mate, where, I'm listening to podcasts and thinking, wow, how cool is it for someone to have a creative career and be rewarded for their mind instead of their ability to clock in hours and all these things. But for the long period, I would think like that, but there would never be a clear path to actually getting there. And that was the big difference. So there was just this like abyss of hopelessness with it. And my solution was just to keep working hard and, eventually make enough money to quit your job and figure it out. And then COVID hit. So that was kind of like a early retirement for dentists, right? Because you can't drill teeth from your living room. And my friend sent me a podcast from Naval Ravikant, how to get rich without getting lucky. And that was like the penny drop moment for me. It's like 3 hours of basically telling you how to build your internet career. And at that point was when I was like, look, I have to make this happen or else I'm going to look back in 20, 30 years and be really disappointed that I didn't.
It's so fascinating because you listen to that and then 3 years later is when you actually, like, it all worked in some sense, you could say, like in a way that is tangible, obvious, and we'll get into that success. But it's interesting, like the middle road of that is you listening to the podcast, in that 3 years, you sustaining enough enjoyment for the thing to keep going and to be able to, all right, what am I doing here? Like, I'm still trying to execute on this first thing that I heard. How did you sustain the boring middle process?
It's never really felt boring for me. You know, I get this, like, there's that meme, right, where it's like, you got to fall in love with doing the boring things. But originally, I was doing work that I didn't enjoy, and I was consistent with that, right? And so one of Naval's first pieces of advice is pursuing your intellectual curiosity will get you much further than whatever's hot right now or whatever's going to make you the most money. And so constantly, as I am, because I've kind of tested out a lot of business models, a lot of ways to write, where I'm writing, the question I'm constantly asking myself is, where is my energy? And I've been following that. You know, I've said no to a lot of things. I've had to pivot a lot, but where is my energy has helped me to kind of keep going. And thankfully, throughout that kind of experimenting, the golden strand has been writing. You know, at the end of the day, if I'm writing 3-4 hours a day, even when I wasn't making money, I felt like a champion. And then when I started covering my bills, I felt like a god. It was amazing. Excuse my language. And so, like, it's that idea of finding the skill you love before the external results roll in. Because if you do that and you're just putting in the reps, you know, when stuff starts going well, you just feel on cloud nine all the time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I want to break down for people a tweet you have here that goes into your income, followers, and newsletter subscribers. We'll do income and followers so people can get a sense for it. But year one, $0. Year two, $6,750. Year three, $290,000. For followers, it was year one, 1,000 followers. Year two, 33,000. And year three, 190,000. That's pretty remarkable. And that's exciting to see on the plotted line for people. But, you know, a lot of people have been in the online game for more than 3-6 years, and they don't see those results in that way. What advice would you have for those people?
It's funny because most of my journey, I've been telling the story of persistence without results, right? So, you know, the first year was horrible, you know, getting through it. And now I've kind of leapfrogged over. And I think it's about, again, making choices that align with the thing you want to do most is really important. So I sucked at writing at the start. Like, I was terrible. I didn't know anything about this content world. Like, I thought Twitter was for sports commentary, copywriting for lawyers, and, you know, making money online was for drug dealers, right? And I didn't get the game at all. But one thing I have done over the past 3 years is I've been extremely committed to learning it. And so I feel like knowledge and skill are the two things that compound the most online. You know, the better your ideas, the better you communicate, then the more kind of opportunities you attract. And one thing that I have done that maybe in contrast to my friends is I've been very specific about what we're trying to achieve. So I'm not really focused on multiple social media platforms until recently. I'm only focused on one communication skill, which is writing. So I've only just started podcasting, all these things, because, you know, you get great at one thing and then the rest happens as a result, right? It's when you're spread too thin and you're trying to achieve everything, you end up achieving nothing, or you hit these ceilings that if you got really good at one thing, which I'm not quite there yet, everything else happens as a result.
Yeah. And how do you, like, the thing that is so exciting is you're a perfect example of what you do when you just focus on one thing. And so specifically, like you mentioned just Twitter, like you've been focused on Twitter and email lists, but that's one mode of communication. And it's like, I get so excited, man. Like, I'm like, all right, Instagram's cool and TikTok, and let's post on YouTube, and let's do, you know, podcasts is the start of it all. But I started on Twitter, but I get so excited by so many different facets. Like, what do you suggest for me? Is it like focus on one thing till you get to a certain point? Like, what's the actual advice to me?
Sure. I mean, I'll start with the caveat. I also get very excited, mate. I want to do everything. Like, I'm very curious, and that's a great advantage as a content creator, but it's also very risky as an entrepreneur. And so for me, it's about pre-deciding constraints as you're going about operating, because that allows you to make decisions a bit more rationally instead of emotionally. So for example, one of my rules is that I work in 90-day sprints, and these 90-day sprints is one big goal. And that kind of helps me stop getting pulled around, because the reason why I failed in my first year was because I was shiny object syndrome everywhere. I was trying to do everything at once, and I'm kind of trying to keep faith in the model that if you do one thing really well, everything else goes much faster. And so working in 90-day sprints and just saying like, what are we trying to achieve here, as opposed to like what's really cool, has it's basically been the way that I've been doing it, mate.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'd love to go into like the 6-figure launch. And, you know, in May of this year, you just absolutely knocked it out of the park, crushed it. I believe was what, over either $100,000 or $200,000 worth of income coming in. And I'm curious, like, what surprised you from it? What would you do looking back differently? And break that down for people who might not be aware.
Yeah, so we'll start with the last one then. People who aren't aware, I released a product called High Impact Writing in May 2023, and it went nuts. So we made 142K in 4 days, and I guess the most surprising thing is that because, you know, for the previous I mean, it took me 18 months to make my first dollar, and then the next year was around 100K. So to kind of double your business revenue in 4 days was absolutely wild. In terms of what I would do differently, I actually am quite hesitant to answer that question these days, because I kind of find like you can't predict what you would do differently, because, you know, the thing that got you here, there's maybe a reason. And so the only thing I would say that I've been disappointed in myself with it was how unstoic I was, because I do try to be stoic about results, and actually this one caught me by surprise. So I'll explain what happened. I'm a huge fan of managing expectations, right? I think the more you expect something, the less you enjoy it, especially when you don't get it. And so throughout this whole product building process, I'm like, look, I'm just going to do the best job possible. I'm going to go learn everything I can about copywriting, marketing, product building, hype, all this sort of stuff. And one of those things was kind of learning from internet marketers. And, you know, these guys, like, it's crazy the way people think about money online compared to real life, right? I'm obviously doing the finger expression there. The numbers get very inflated. People were like, oh, you need a 6-figure launch. You need a 6-figure. And I was like, I want to make 20, 30K. My last launch was 5K. And anyway, by launch day, I was like, you know what? I feel like I've put in a lot of bloody work here. Maybe it might actually happen. And instead, Danny, what happened, mate? So I'm excited. I'm ready. I booked drinks with my girlfriend like 2 hours after the launch. Like, yeah, we'll go sip beers in the sun and watch the results roll in. And I sold 3 copies in 2 hours.
3 copies in 2 hours. Wow.
Yeah, dude, it was rough. And I was like, oh yeah, this is why you set rules around how to think and feel. It's for moments like this when stuff's actually going wrong. And so then it was a roller coaster of 4 days, because I was like, oh God, you know, I always say, like, you either win or you have a story to tell. And I was like, I really didn't want to tell that story though. And instead what happened was, I think it was just this snowball effect. You know, a lot of content went out. Most importantly, a lot of people started buying. And when people started buying, I asked them if they would mind sharing it, and people, you know, if they liked it. And so on Twitter, by the end of it, you know, I was seeing them retweet every 5 minutes, and people, just more and more people coming in, and it was really humbling and really flattering. A wild emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, and just to give people some sense, you said at my first launch, the first launch you did, I guess in year 2 of your business, yeah, you were too scared to sell. This time, I treated it like a game, or like Gameday. I created 23 emails, 40 plus tweets, 4 threads, 2 videos, 1 Twitter Spaces. I was exhausted. But if you believe in your product, you need to go all in. You can't help people if you don't reach them. And what's interesting is that, was that the plan from the beginning to do something like that? How did the plan change as you saw in the first 2 or 3 hours, like, oh wow, only 3 people bought, or 5 people? Like, How did that impact the plan, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, it did impact the plan because the email frequency was the big one. I don't know if you know Grammar Hippie George 10 on Twitter. I sent him a message. He's a very big marketer, and I was like, oh, didn't go so well. And he was like, how many emails are you sending? I said 2 a day, and he was like, I'm going to send more emails during your launch as an affiliate. Like, you need to sort that out. And so I wrote a lot more. In terms of the rest of it, that game day attitude was something I learned from that first launch, where I think you really feel bad about selling if you haven't provided enough value, and you don't appreciate the relationship you build when you're putting content out every day with your readers, right? Like, I'm sure if you decided to launch anything off the back of the podcast, a lot of people would be like, hell yeah, man, I'm with you. And I think you have to get out your head with that a little bit. And so what I decided was I really don't sell that much. So I was like, look, if we're going to sell in a 4-day window, it's all in. And it kind of boils down to simple economics there, right? It's like, how many people can I get to click this page on the basis that a certain percentage will convert? So wrote a lot of words, man. And by the end, I was ready for beaches instead.
So how many people did actually end up clicking on the page?
Do you know what, man? I didn't even look in the end, which is pretty bad, right? We got 506 sales, and it's just been such a roller coaster since then that I haven't actually gone back to look at analytics and stuff. We're launching again in a month, so that's probably on the list to do, just to make sure we know what we're up to.
Yeah, and the specific price point I saw was $297 and an $1,000 offering. What was why those two numbers, and how did you come with that?
Yeah, sure. But 297 in the creator world, there seems to be like this agreed price of $150 for a digital product, and I was terrified to charge $297, and that's actually one reason why I was able to put so much time and effort in, because when I doubled the price, I realized this thing had to be absolutely banging, and it was a brilliant forcing function there. And anyway, the discussion for doubling the price was there's this idea from Dan Kennedy: there's no strategic advantage for being the second cheapest. So you might as well go for the most expensive. And there's not that many standalone writing products in my sort of level at this price. So we went for $297 for the standard, and then it's $1,000 for basically a consultation with me and a content review where I critique your writing and show where you're going wrong. Two reasons behind it, really, man. Like, for one, you have a price anchoring. $297 doesn't sound too bad compared to $1,000, which is obviously nice. And secondly, and probably more importantly, you get to keep in contact with your customer. One mistake I made towards the end of last year was I'm very like kind of values first, metrics second, and one of my values is freedom. And so I stopped selling my time altogether, right? I was like, you know what, I just want to write. And then I realized that for like 2 months I didn't speak to anyone. And I was like, oh, wait, there's probably value in keeping contact with your audience. So we had 0.3% of the purchases bought that one, around £11,000 or dollars, sorry. And so that was kind of the rationale behind it.
That makes sense. Now, as you continue to have success, you also like get faced with more opportunities, and now more things are coming at you. I know you've written about, people are thinking I should do this, and then people are saying I should do this, and people are like, how do you decide which opportunities to focus on as you increase your success?
For me, it's all about core values. Again, it's just another constraint that allows you to approach decision making with more of a rational lens. So most of the appeal of the opportunities that are coming in now are fame and fortune, right? Money, opportunities, or the ability to grow more. Hey, I can do this for you, I can do that for you. And they all sound really good. You're like, wow, hell yeah, I'd like to do that. And I had this constant thing in the back of my head where it's like, look, you quit your 9 to 5 for a reason, because you wanted to completely align your curiosity and career. And a huge part of that is making sure that every decision is, am I living according to my values? So I run through that checklist, 4 values, and I go, yes, 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 yes. And if I get a no, I'm like, I'm just going to say no, because there's this idea from Buffett that I love where it's like, you say no to one opportunity to wait for the great, right? And so I've just been doing that consistently, really just saying a lot of no's based on the values.
Now, figuring out what you want is perhaps the most important question any of us can ask. How did you actually go through those core exercises, those core values, and figure them out?
I think there's like a two-pronged attack here. I do feel like you need a base level of self-awareness to understand at least that maybe the thing you have been pursuing has been influenced by something else, which is precisely what happened to me. I became a dentist. I decided that at 16. I'm from a working class village, and we were like, dentists are always rich. And there we go, 10 years of life making that happen. And being able to realize that success is subjective, right? You have like an internal compass, and that's the thing that determines how you feel. I feel like working on that bit immediately is the big part, right? Because a lot of people make a lot of choices that make them miserable, but you're just not thinking about the second order consequence of what you decide. And you either learn that through a lot of self-reflecting, reading, thinking, listening to smarter people. Alternatively, life forces it on you. You reach a boiling point in one thing, and you think, well, this isn't right. And both are great in the long run if you choose to learn from it. And the other side of it, man, is you have to get to work. Like my big mistake, dude, was I spent hours and hours and hours thinking about the thing that would only happen by taking action. Like I wanted to be a creator. I had no clue what I wanted to create. I didn't even start with writing. It was just like exploring. I started with stand-up comedy, and obviously I wasn't very good at that. But what I mean is you have to get going, then get good, which is from Jack Butcher and Paul Graham wrote about this recently as well. It's like you find what you're going to be great at by doing lots of work and listening to the signal, right? So I kind of feel like if you're not happy, you just need to get to work and pay attention to the signal in your head, thinking this is great, this isn't great, and just let it kind of correct course as you're going along.
When you discovered writing online, creating, what was the thing that pushed you over the edge, and what did the people around you say in that time? Like what was you had to create this amazing career as a dentist that I'm sure people around you was like, that's a pretty cool thing, and we approve of this. I'm insinuating, I don't know if that's true, but that's what I'm thinking in my head. And I think a lot of people are in that scenario of doing something that their parents or friends or family are saying, that's pretty cool. That's a standard job that is accepted. Yeah. But now they're going to the online world, and the online world presents something where it's like, this is not cool to people who are raised in a world without the online world. Yeah. So how did you, what was the perspective from the people around you?
People around me was generally pretty positive, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people didn't get it. And I actually didn't even bother persuading people, That's what I was up to. I was like, I'm just figuring it out. The people closest to me, they were like, I can see how hard you're working on something you don't love. Let's see what you can do without that. But there's always that element of uncertainty around the decision, because when you're a dentist, like you're saying, the path is laid out, you've worked really hard to get there, and online you say you're going to be a writer, and people are like, what the hell is that? Now when I talk to my friends, they're like, I can see what you mean now, like you've done the thing you said you were going to do.
Yeah, it's interesting how you kind of need to prove to people what you're talking about by doing the actual thing, because they don't have the vision for you fleshed out. It was interesting talking to a friend recently who I've known since 2018. And he's like, dude, you've really done something with this podcast. And I was like, in my head, when I started it, I envisioned that in the beginning. And I feel like it probably is a similar thing for you, where you saw what it could become when you first started writing online, but then people around you really couldn't see that. And life, it seems like, is just about helping people realize the vision in your head, or holding the vision in your head long enough so that people around you can actually see it.
100%, man. I think you need a little bit of unreasonable belief in what you can do. But to me, the silly thing is, most of the time it's not unreasonable, right? Like you wanted to build a podcast loads of people built a podcast. I wanted to be a writer. Loads of people were writers. And so, you know, the path is already out there. I had to keep reminding myself of that, where, you know, early on, you're like, a lot of wobbles where you're like, I'm not sure this is going to work. And that got very depressing actually at points, because the monkey mind is not designed to work so hard without results, right? And you begin to persuade yourself you're being silly. Go back to your old job. This is a risk, all these things. But it's like, if you keep putting in the reps and you expect results in 3 years, not 3 months, you might not get quite to where you want to be, but I'm sure you're getting pretty close. And I just keep, I've got it written right here, and I just says 2 years, not 2 months, just to keep reminding myself every project.
2 years, not 2 months.
2 years, not 2 months, man.
What does that mean?
Anything I start, I want results faster. Or I start it and I think, you know, it's not going to work out because I've started and it's hard. But like, pain is part of the process, right? Like, the start is supposed to suck. And so, you know, when I'm launching a project, I'm like, look, let's just give this 2 years. And again, this is just like a rule that I found, because when I was, just as I started writing, I told my girlfriend, I was like, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This is going to be rough. I don't know how to write. I have no clue what I'm doing, and I'm working 6 days a week as a dentist. So let's just give it 2 years before we look at the result. And the funny thing is, month 24 was when I hit my first 10K month. And so it's like, if you quit on month 18, you would have been very, very disappointed to kind of not get to the delayed result.
It's so interesting because Gary Vaynerchuk often talks about how when he starts something new, he doesn't really think about marketing it until 2 years into it. And that was like a great perspective of time and time frames, because you're not going to actually start promoting something to the level that you can after you've done it for 2 years. But when you're thinking about longer time frames and you think about those 2 years, what happens in those 2 years, people testing it, if you actually stick with your product and your course for 2 years from now, it's like 500 people is going to seem so small in that you've impacted and helped. But it's like, that's hard to think about on launch day when it's like so much success, so many people getting value from it. So yeah, man, it's cool extending the time horizons. One thing you've mentioned over and over again is working with your girlfriend and your girlfriend's support. And I found this so interesting because you mention her a lot, and I'm sure she plays a role in the business as well. You've said before, my girlfriend and I spent a ridiculous amount of time on the product. That's an amazing thing to be able to work with your significant other in that realm.
With my girlfriend, we met actually on Bumble, where all good romances start, right? Good old internet dating. Let's not get into that. I don't know much about the pros and cons of it, but things are going pretty well. So we're crossing our 5-year anniversary in a month's time, and yeah, she's been brilliant. You know, it's been a lot of like support from her when I was sacrificing so much. And what I mean by that was I was just exhausted 24/7. You know, stupidly as a dentist, my solution, like I said, was to work as hard as I could in something I didn't enjoy. And I couldn't stop that immediately. So, you know, some days I was working 12 hours a day, but I was still writing in the morning. And so by the time the weekends would come, you know, she would appreciate I'm very stressed and like very anxious often because of the work. And anyway, so she started getting me through that. And what happened was, when I started making money online, I realized like distraction is the enemy, right? The more little things that you're doing, the less you can create. And the whole business is based on like how well you can think and how well you can build. And so my girlfriend hated a 9-to-5, like detested it. And I just said to her, I was like, look, I'm making enough money to pay my bills. So why can't I pay your wage and you quit? And let's just build it together, because, you know, this is something that can help it happen faster and faster. If Jenna, my girlfriend, is handling, I call her my chief clarity officer, is one role, right? So
chief clarity officer, that's great.
which is a polite way to put assistant, but like she makes sure that I'm only doing high level stuff, and she does all my design work. So that's been a really nice two-pronged approach to making the newsletter worth reading. You know, we have visuals and stuff in there, and she's doing stuff like that. And the main benefit, mate, is that we have complete freedom now. So, you know, we're never tied down to a 9 to 5. We're taking days off when the sun's shining, which is not that often here in England. And just those little things have really helped us feel like we're pursuing a purpose together.
What attributes or qualities did you notice in her that made you realize she might be successful as a chief clarity officer?
You know, I just, well, she didn't really have a clue about the internet world so much. I think a lot of things can be taught, but character and morals are the most important parts, right? And I was like, well, who do I trust more than anyone? It's my girlfriend, right? And she's extremely hardworking, persistent, and creative. So I was like, well, that's perfect. That's the sort of person I want to partner up with. So, and yeah, like there was a lot of unexpected friction, because I remember telling people, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going into business with my girlfriend, and everyone was like, ooh, good luck. And like a few months ago, we were looking at each other, and it was like, we're speaking a bit too much about business now, actually. We need to remember that it's like, there's the relationship side. So we've been correcting course a little bit there, but overall it's been brilliant.
And what have been some of the most challenging bits of it? Other, you mentioned like speaking too much about business, but what other things have come up as a way of friction?
Yeah, I think maybe disconnecting. So, you know, it's the hardest part about being a creator I've found so far is disconnecting, right? Because you are constantly plugged into something, and it's actually very anti-productive towards the thing that will actually make you do well, which is creating, right? So what we found was time was just getting eaten into, where we're like checking emails, doing this and that. And so we had to introduce a few rules. So we have slow Sundays, which is no social media at all. We're both now completely off every platform. So she's quit Instagram, TikTok, all of that. I don't have any social media on my phone, neither does she. And we're doing all these little things because we're like, it's very easy to get sucked into this world, when actually what we want is to build something really cool and interesting for my audience, and then enjoy life as a result. And you just need to make sure that you're kind of playing that game well.
Well, take us through the realization that it's too much time on the screen in order to unplug, because a lot of people might be going through that, but might not even be realizing that they are spending too much time on the devices or the screens. Like, what made you realize it, and what made you act on it?
In terms of realizing it, I think I was looking back at how I was feeling, and I kept thinking, you know what? You're not as happy as you should be. You have your dream life now. And obviously there is that element of habitual adaptation, right? You get used to everything. But I was like, if 2 years ago Kieran Drew knew what you were doing now, like, he would just be on like permanent cocaine or something. He'd be so goddamn happy. And when I was thinking about it, I realized that I was getting a lot of my self-worth. You know, on Twitter I get thousands of notifications a day. And at first, you know, one of my rules, mate, was no social media on my phone, and I had it on my laptop. But then I was like, oh, it's getting a bit impractical, because, you know, I need to send a DM every now and then. And before I knew it, every spare minute, I would try to fill by picking up my phone. And then I was like, well, how many, I like to read about a book a week. And, you know, there was a point where I was only reading a book every 2-3 weeks and finding it really hard to focus. And I thought, you know what, there's this like source here, right? This like the thing that is pulling you away, your focus away. And also with the content side, which you maybe can relate to, it's like, you feel like you have to say the same thing as everyone else. And it happens very gradually, because algorithms reward you for saying one thing and not saying the other. And then I started looking at my content, and I was like, I don't think I would be a raving fan of what I'm saying. And I think that's really important, right? You have to, like, the whole point was follow your own curiosity, scratch your own itch. And so I feel like I sort of lost track of the message a bit. And so no social media, no emails. I go on Twitter for like 20 minutes a day max. A lot of reading, a lot of thinking, a lot of walking. And the past 2-3 months, of like the product and stuff, it's all because of that. Because you get clear on what you're thinking about and stuff. So I don't think I'll ever come back on my phone, man. I think it's very toxic.
Yeah. It's a weird balance of like the paradoxical nature of it. If you think it's so, if we think it's so toxic that it can hurt ourselves, but then we're putting content on the system, it's like hurting other people. It's like you have to do hoops with yourself to understand that it's ethical and moral. Like if you really start thinking about it a lot, you start getting into the position of like, why even create content in the first place? Like why even put stuff out at all? And then to the point where you start feeling upset that you look at your own content and you're like, this is not things that I would approve of or things that I would want to be saying. It's like, wow, that's a crazy thing. So like, what's your stance on social media today? Is it ethical? Is it moral? And if it is not, how can we still be putting stuff out on it?
Sure, it's a brilliant question. And so I think social media is shallow. I think it's toxic, and I think it encourages this like superficial nature, and everyone expects super fast results, right? Because that's just the nature of people projecting themselves. But it's also a tool, and I feel like a tool is only bad depending on the use case, right? Like a fire is brilliant when you cook food, it's terrible when you burn the house down. And the same is true with social media, where it's the best opportunity we have. Like the internet is the best megaphone in the world. And so you can make a real difference on people's lives. And the one thing I love about it is like when I write, I might go and help 10 people, and those 10 people might go and help 100 people. And there's like this ripple effect of positive energy. And so this is the point where you need to be the source of positive energy. Because if your answer is to jump away from social media and think I don't want to be part of all this, you're causing the problem, right? Like there's people like you which I think you do beautifully, by the way, kind of combining this like spirituality kind of philosophy around life. And I listen to your podcast and I'm like, I feel good. I've learned something. I feel motivated. And I feel like if creators are inspiring and teaching the person they used to be, and you're kind of focusing on the right things, that's brilliant. The other side of it is people need to educate themselves how to protect their attention.
How do they do that?
Well, like I said, you need to take off we have this obsession with frictionless, right? Everything has to be frictionless, seamless. The best thing you can do for the internet is introduce friction. So for example, to go on my email, I have to go into browser, and it's so annoying. So I don't do it. There's this app called Freedom where you can just pick which are blocked, right? Because digital dopamine is like one of the most addictive drugs in the world. And so, you're going like, oh, I don't want to go on my social media in the morning. And then you're tired, and it's really hard not to when you're tired, right? But my phone will literally be like, look, you can't even go on anything for 18 hours of the day. So I don't think about it at all. Decision removed. So it's by introducing barriers, right? Rules and barriers.
What are those 18 hours? And what's the 6-hour window you have that you're allowed to use? Is it social media, email? Is it how do you structure that?
So it's everything, which I'm allowed onto. And that's from 1 p.m. till 7 p.m. So basically my rules, mate, are I wake up pretty early, like 5-ish. And that's not, I'm not like a hustle pro. What happened was I tried to, I always have to I've entered this like pro world online, but like I read fantasy for like 90 minutes a day. Like I'm not cool at all. I'm not like that guy. But the early morning thing, I told myself as a dentist, I'm going to spend 2 hours building my dream instead of my bosses, when you start your day. And that just stuck. It was like writing in the morning is one of the most beautiful things, and banging out all your deep work before people are awake. Like it's just a brilliant feeling. So I'll do, 4 hours of deep work, hit the gym, 2 hours of normal work. And then about then is 1-ish. And then I'm like, well, cool, man. You've done everything you need to do. Relax. And, there's no apps on the phone, but I'll be allowed to go on Twitter on my browser or go on the computer. But for the most part, because I've done my workout, I'm kind of tired. I just want to read and walk. So, I only spend maybe 20, 30 minutes on social and email. And email I only do once a week now. So just little rules like that.
Email you only do once a week.
Yeah. It was one of these it's like, that expression that you've just said is because you can't do that. And I just remember thinking to myself, I think it's Derek Sivers where it's like questioning the norm, right? And I was like, you know what? I hate email. I hate replying to them. And I was like, well, what happens if you only reply every Monday evening when you're like done with your day? And usually Mondays are my worst days creatively, and nothing happens. So I just reply every Monday, and you know, people have to wait 5-6 days. If there's something like super urgent, which there never is, obviously I might reply sooner, but I don't look at my Gmail until Monday afternoon. And just, it sounds silly, but like it's these incremental improvements, they lead to clarity of thought, and clear writing, clear thinking, they kind of go hand in hand. So this is what the movement I'm on. Basically, I got too much time on my hands. So I'm playing around with all this stuff instead.
Nah, man, I think there really is something to it. And do you have like in your email signature, like only responds on Mondays or something like that? Like
Maybe I should, but no, I just leave it. Like, I think there's actually a bit of an implication that I'm busy anyway. Because, you know, the newsletter's got to about 28,000 people. And I think people maybe think I shouldn't be replying straight away anyway. So they don't mind. I think if I was in a 9 to 5, it'd be a little bit different, right? People get pretty annoyed.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
It's interesting because when you were just starting out, or maybe still to this day, you've said over the past year, I've sent a personalized video to every one of my customers. It's a brilliant way to build relationships and go the extra mile. Yep. So it's interesting that you say that you don't respond to emails, but that's not stopping you from connecting with people you care about or people you want to stay connected with. So I want to point that out because it's very important for people to realize, I feel.
100%. I don't agree with, if you want to build an audience as an early creator, the most important thing you could do is the things that don't scale, you know, from Paul Graham. And that, like, I reply to almost every DM that I can that's genuinely replyable. Again, Monday afternoons I do it. And by having these like little rules about my time, it actually lets me allocate it better. And so when I say about kind of creating, building a tribe instead of just an audience, because I don't do a lot of things that other creators do where like you're getting bogged down in activities, I managed to build 8 free courses over a year. I just gave them away for free.
8 free courses.
Yeah. Like, and they're high quality too. Like I put a lot of time into them. I gave them away for free. And I was making little decisions like that because I had the energy to focus on that kind of brand building. I don't really like the word brand, but over delivering for my audience, right? Because I was a complete beginner in my niche. It's like, well, you've got to do the things that you can like focus on, right? If you want to get results.
Dude, 8 free. So like that, there's so much there that I want to dive into, but one thing is like building the email list to 28,000 people. One of the reasons why you've been able to do that is because of the 8 free courses, I would assume. 100%. And if that is the case, what else have you done to build the email list? Because I think you spend enough time in the online game and you start realizing like email is the most important asset of anything. So
100%. Yeah, it's funny. Probably about a year and a half ago, I used to worry a lot about competition. You know, like writers online are like the answer to the internet, right? Like they're everywhere. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to compete with people like Justin Welsh or Dickie Bush? And well, you can compete on value. And as a result, you attract for email. And the crazy thing about email is you could build your own world there. You know, like social media is like, we're presenting our most polished side, but to me, email is brilliant for building a connection. The only thing that's better is podcasts because you're in the ear for hours a week, and that's absolutely marvelous. Like writing is pretty hard, but email is your own audience. So, in terms of how I got the 28K, so yeah, my free courses have been downloaded about 30,000 times, and you know, people unsubscribe. The problem with giving people free stuff is that some people just get it and then leave. That's cool. They're not my customers anyway. And the other side, man, is just sheer reps. You know, I very rarely miss 2 threads a week on Twitter. Unfortunately, that does make me a thread boy, which, you know, is like a crisis of faith in my head. But my whole mission as a writer is just to basically learn in public and teach the person I used to be. And so I could make an output commitment. I'm going to create 2 threads, 1 newsletter, and 3 tweets a day. I'm going to sit tight and watch it work. And, for the most part, it didn't work. But then when you start getting more and more engagement, people begin to pay attention. And so, I'm always requesting signups in my content. We're putting about 50-50 from Twitter and a little bit of paid growth now. And that's why it's always audience first. Like, you build on social. Yes, you don't own your audience, but the whole point is like writing is like a magnet, right? And for a magnet to work, you need proximity first. But once you've got that bond, you can begin to pull people away. And so 100K on Twitter, 30,000 on the newsletter. It's just an extension of the social media content.
You mentioned you do 2 threads a week. Are there any other non-negotiables you need to hit every week for Twitter or for your growth?
The caveat I'll put here is that that's no longer a non-negotiable. It used to be. It used to be 2 to 3 non-negotiable no matter what. And high impact writing stopped that for me. Not because I made money and I was like, oh, you don't need to keep your pedal on the gas, but because 2 months before high impact writing, I realized it wasn't getting built. And this was the first time I realized that consistency can be a curse just as much as a gift. And I was like, well, why isn't it getting built? And I was like, 90% of your time is on content. So I stopped writing threads. It let me make up a huge asymmetrical bet on the product. And now I'm like, okay, if you have other stuff to do, you can dial down the threads, but 1 a week. Okay. Like I said, so it's 2 threads a week, ideally, 3 tweets a day, and a newsletter a week. And I feel like if you can nail those 3 things, these 3 moving parts, then it's just patience and reps. And there's a lot of stuff that will come in that's like these shiny objects or the bells and whistles. And it's like, no. If you can get good at creating social media content and you can take them somewhere and you get good at creating personalized content, then when you decide to launch an offer, build your business, do whatever the hell you want, you will have enough true fans to begin doing like that side of the journey. So it's worked so far.
Clearly. You mentioned on consistency, you said sometimes you got to throw away the plan. I wrote no threads or tweets, just scheduled ones. I wrote no emails. I stopped affiliating and taking ad slots. I pulled the plug on everything, but it broke a lot of false beliefs because I rarely break consistency. Missing threads made me feel like I was failing. Watching every number drop was terrifying. However, I now know the truth. Consistency is a gift and a curse. You touched on it a little before there, but take us through the feelings of when you stopped being consistent. Because like you, I stopped. I did 1 podcast a week, or 1 podcast a couple of weeks ago. And then I just got back on the train of doing 3, and just, it was like, that was normal. And that was just the way it was. And so I think that, people have these beliefs of it has to be this way. It has to be. And then you stop and you're just like, oh, you could just get back on the train whenever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the problem or the difficulty is what got you here won't get you there. Mm-hmm. And consistency is bloody important, to like the whole thing that you and I are doing right now is compounding, right? And for compounding, you need reps, and you need to put reps all the way through when you're not seeing results. And that's a really hard thing. So then when you start getting results, you're like, hey, all those reps work. Let's do it again. And it's not a bad idea, but there's that idea from Naval where it's like, no, you work like a lion, not a cow. And we're told to graze like 9 to 5, putting in your 8 hours, grinding away, chipping. The problem is that when you begin to build leverage points, you need to start like going all in, right? So like, for example, for you, it's like, you've got this brilliant podcast and that's something that you can fully leverageable. But if you were trying to do 5-10 different things now, you're going to impact the one thing that will get results. And so I don't know, like it was tough to stop writing threads because again, that's what got me there. I think you need to be careful not to like wrap up your internal definition of success of your ability to turn up. And that's maybe easier said than done. For some people can do that easily, right? But there's a lot of people like you and I maybe that we're very good at just putting in the work. We take pride in putting in the work. And I think having this, so I mentioned earlier, like this 90-day review where you just stop and you go, are we working on the right thing? Am I enjoying myself? Can I double down on the bits I do enjoy? What is the stuff I don't? And that can kind of help you just realize that maybe you're like not playing the right game anymore, and try out something new, or get rid of something, or add more stuff in.
So I'm going away on a retreat basically for 5 days. And I'm curious, this is like my version of the 90-day at the end of the sprint, asking questions about myself, even though I haven't done this in 3 years since I started the podcast, right before I started. And I'm curious what advice you would give me, as well as what questions I should think about asking on this retreat where I'm no technology, no phone, no Wi-Fi, nothing really.
I'd be hesitant to give you advice because I'm not an expert on reflection. If I was to, like, I firstly, I admire it, by the way, the whole 5-day disconnect. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I would probably be looking at doing this in two separate ways. Like the focused reflection and the unfocused what comes up as a result. Because I feel like you can be too premeditated, like I have to think this through and this through and this through, when actually it's like you want to get bored, man. Like boredom is the precursor to curiosity and stuff. And so lots of walks where you're like, I'm not going to think about anything and let's see what's on my mind. And then on the flip side, man, you said it's been 3 years since you've like done something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant, man. Like, I think you need to go back to the start and think through all the things that have happened. And for one, give yourself a bloody big pat on the back, because it's so easy to forget like the early emotions and like all that hard work put in. And maybe just asking, I mean, the question I ask now, man, is, I think like less is more. There's one question I think about a lot, and it's what the hell am I trying to achieve here? I feel like that kind of cuts through a lot of bullshit for me, where I'm like, we should go take on this and take on that and take on that. And it's like, well, what are we trying to achieve here? And I know that you're quite motivated by impact. Like there's like this deeper meaning to just creating content. And what is the vehicle that's going to help you do that? Like what's the thing that you can double down on?
Yeah, that's great advice, man. I'm going to be listening
back
to that. Yeah, absolutely.
In these 5 days, are you thinking about the name of the podcast? Because I think you touched on this, saying that you were kind of umming and ahhing about the name of it.
Yeah, I actually think I'm set on the name of the podcast.
Cool.
Like that was, something that was coming up a few times.
Yeah.
For me in conversation when I would introduce myself and tell people about it, it felt uncomfortable to say this is the name of the podcast because it's not reflective of what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah.
But part of me is okay with that. And part of me is like, if someone wants to look under the curtain, they will.
And I remember reading the tweet and thinking, I mean, look, you've taken accountability, right? And accountability is where all the asymmetrical bets happen. So that's brilliant by putting a name on it. But B, man, again, we've been kind of doing this like around the same length, the project. The beauty of having it under your own name is the flexibility to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Like every time I put a label on something, I'm like, I'm evolving so fast in what I want to do. If you've got all this baggage each time you decide to pivot, it can actually limit your growth. And I even have it now in my newsletter. I love the name Digital Freedom. I think it's really cool, but I feel like impact has become more important than freedom for me. And I'm like, well, there you go. Now you're called Digital Freedom, but it's cool because the first email people get is that you get everything you want when you help other people get what they want. So I can correct that a little bit, but I just think Danny Miranda's show, man, like you've got 20, 30 years of just moving around and testing and stuff, and I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I appreciate the vote of encouragement, and that's kind of, it's crazy because at one point in your life you could value freedom more, another point you could value impact more, and it's interesting how like you would think that those would stay relatively the same in you, but as you experience more of one or the other, you're like, well, actually, I enjoy this more. I mean, a perfect example, right, would be like Alex Hormozy valuing his anonymous nature of being rich and anonymous. And then at some point, he's like, I actually want to impact people. I actually want to help people. And if I want to do that, then I actually need to be more known. And if I'm more known, then I have less freedom. And that's the trade-off you make in a different season of your life.
Yeah.
And I think it's important thing to realize and reflect on. And you're right. Digital freedom is an amazing name. Digital impact is also an amazing name. And it's like, but there's something that happens when you're like, oh, should I change this? Should I not? That's more mental bandwidth.
Yeah.
And yeah, I admire what I really admire in you is your, you say you're not good at reflection, but I feel like there's a peace and like, I imagine you like surfing with the waves of life while knowing which wave you're going on and being very comfortable with that. And I really admire that in you. Where do you think that comes from?
Oh, thanks for that, man. Where does that come from? I was really lucky when I was 16 to be diagnosed with a broken neck and a neurological tumor. And, I say lucky because prior to that point, really pessimistic, anxious, not driven at all, and not really making the most of my life. And basically what happened, man, was, shock diagnosis. We had, me, about 20 hours of surgery. And, during that time, they were like, look, there's a chance you wake up, you can never walk again. And that was the first time I kind of realized that you have a choice in every situation. And that choice often is just how you react. Right. And that's the beauty of it, right? It's like, no matter what happens, you can always be the happiest guy in the room, right? And I just came out with that, and I've been trying to embody that attitude. Like I say to my girlfriend, it's like, I feel like if someone chopped my leg off, I would like to be the guy that could the next day be like, oh, it could be worse. I've still got one more. And I don't know if that'll happen, by the way. Don't hold me to that. But I just kind of feel like I think a lot about the shortness of life, the fragility of life, because, I've got a lot of work done on my neck, and you never know what's going to happen in the future. And so I'm just trying to go with the flow and just like be unfazable. It's just a really nice thing that I aim for. And yeah, like I said, a lot of it is because stuff went really wrong, and it was a gift.
It's like you don't choose what happens to you often, but you do choose how you respond to that.
100%.
And getting better at that response is another game of life that we can spend an entire life's worth trying to get better at and improving at.
Yeah.
What has helped you gain perspective and gain ability to respond in a better way to so many of these situations?
I mean, firstly, it's learning ideas from other people. So I remember the precise moment it happened during one of the darker times. I picked up Man's Search for Meaning, and there was this quote, right, where it's like, between stimulus and response, there's this window, and inside that window, your ability to choose, and that's the source of freedom. I butchered that a little bit, and that made me realize, because dude, I still get angry and I still make bad choices and all those things, but it's that ability to be like, okay, I feel reactive, but let's be proactive. And one thing that I spoke earlier about, this internal compass, right? Where how do you base your self-worth? And for me, one of my core values is character. So we've got freedom, mastery, impact, and character. And so when something happens and I respond poorly, I'm like, that's the one thing that I don't agree with in terms of how you handle your life. Something happens, I know if I did something wrong and I respond well, perfect. Right? Because the response is like, character is a choice, response is everything. And so what I'm trying to say to people is, you don't just wake up one day and be like, I'm going to be positive. Like you don't go to the gym and deadlift 500 pounds. It takes time. And so it's like a game, right? It's like, how much shit can I smile through? Because genuinely the way you react is the whole lens of the world. And what you'll find is at first it's hard. And then later you're just like, you know what? It's just really nice to look at things and not be bothered by a lot of things. So it's worth the work. It just takes time.
One quote that I keep coming back to is, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. And that's from Peter Crone, episode 378. And it so perfectly encapsulates the importance of what you're talking about and how each trigger that you experience is showing you where you're potentially not free. And each time you get upset or each time something really hits you at a deep level, that is your greatest gift because you're able to then respond to that situation in a different way. And so, yeah, what was the last thing that really triggered you?
Oh, the last thing that triggered me. Man, this is gonna sound really bad, but I can't really think of one. Yeah, like I genuinely can't think of one. I mean, the last really peak emotional event that wasn't like fully positive was, and it was positive in the end, was probably quitting my 9 to 5. Like I was terrified, and I was like, if I was a real man, I'd walk in and say it, right? And the funny thing is, I get told I'm brave now, but what ended up happening was, I walked to the door, I had a panic attack, I hid in the alleyway for 20 minutes. Like, calm down, man. Like, Jesus, like, pull yourself together. And then I walked into the practice to quit. And this is a new boss. And he ended up introducing to me to like 5 people. I had a 40-minute conversation about all the materials I wanted and all this stuff. And I was like, I'm quitting. And so I think that probably wasn't the best part of my character. But on the flip side, man, like, since I've become an entrepreneur and since it's full skin in the game, it's been brilliant. Yeah, like I feel like we've been making the right choices, and maybe still motivated by fear, which probably isn't the best, but realizing that you can take action in spite of the fear, like that's been quite a fun game for me now. It's been a constant iteration of just like, how scary can you make this?
What was causing you to be so scared when you go to quit your job?
Yeah, so one of my less positive attributes is a big desire to please people. And, that stems from a lot of childhood things. I think the nature of being sent to a military boarding school, I think you're meant to end up with the desire to please your parents, right? Because you feel like you've been, I don't personally, but psychologically, you look at the world a little bit different. And I kind of carried that with me a lot, where I all throughout school, I'm pleasing people. I'm not really being the person I want to be. I'm just being an idiot, like just to be liked. And anyway, when it got to work, I brought that attitude as well. And I never said no to my boss for years. It's like, you want to work Saturdays? I was like, hell yeah. Like, you want to come in at 9 p.m. at night? I'm like, yeah, cool, man. Like, I just didn't want to disappoint him. And so this was probably the first time that I had actually properly stood up for myself in that regard. I kind of tackled every other mountain, but this one I was like, this is really big for me to make a full decision that impacts someone's life so much, because his practice was brand new. It was meant to be starting the next day, and I was the only dentist working there. So I was like, Jesus, this guy's gonna be pissed off. But I just remember when I'd done it, man, what a relief. And I came out of that practice and I was like, this is my first taste on betting on myself. And now it's much happier saying no to people.
Do you think that people pleasing or the desire to please other people is a lack of knowing yourself? This is one thing personally that I found, was that the reason why in the past I was trying to please people is because I hadn't spent enough time looking at myself and understanding myself to know what I truly valued and cared about. But I don't know if that experience holds true for others as well.
It very much so. Yeah. Like this whole internal compass idea and internal motivation and just understanding what you want and who you are, that process of self-reflection, I completely agree. It's like you just stop caring what other people think when you realize it's just a single player game out here, right? It's just like, it's you versus you, and obviously you have your friends and stuff, but at the end of the day, if you're not happy, what's the point? And yeah, so yeah, I agree with you, man. Like the more I've read about how I'm thinking as a result of what's happening around me, it's like, actually you kind of have a choice in that. And but I'll push back a little bit, mate. I mean, we're both here, we're both content creators. There's still probably a lot of drive in that pleasing other people. We're just doing it at scale now. And so that's why I say it's not like necessarily a bad thing. It's a tool. We're motivated by helping other people, and that's probably stemmed from earlier kind of characteristics.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that, this is more in line with like an actual choice I made versus when I'm like drinking because I want to be cool. It's like a choice that other people made for me in a sense. Like it's unconscious versus conscious.
For sure, man.
And
it's like reactive and proactive, right?
Yeah. And it's been interesting, like understanding why we do the things we do. Like to me, that's everything. And it's been so fun trying to understand myself through other people. And for you, I'm sure it's been interesting understanding yourself through the things you choose to write about or the people you choose to explore. It's like those are all reflections of ourselves at a deep level. And that's a cool thing to witness.
I think that's the beauty of creating content. Like whichever medium you decide, you're kind of doing it selfishly, but the world is watching, so the world benefits. And for you, like you get to speak to the smartest people in the world. That's amazing, because how much reflection you get done in these conversations, I imagine it's a lot. And the same is with writing, right? Like writing is, obviously I'm a little bit biased, I think that's the best vehicle for thinking, because you've got all these ideas in your head and they're all scrambled. You don't really know what you want to do or how you want to say it, and words on a page are very unforgiving. Like you know when an idea sucks when you write about it, and that process of just wrestling with your ideas, it all leads to self-awareness, man. And I just feel like the creators that seem to play the game the longest are the ones that have this internal drive to better themselves and let the world watch while they do it.
1000%. And it's been remarkable watching your journey. I'm excited to keep watching it. And you might be familiar that the way I end these podcasts is with a challenge, asking the guests for a challenge to help point the audience to something that they should be doing. Does a challenge come to mind?
Wow. Just like a habit or something? Is that what you mean?
It could be an action somebody could take. It could be a way of thinking. It could be a thought process.
Easy. Yeah. I think it has to be like start posting and thought online every day. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to that have the same internal drive to make an impact, but they just don't get started. And you'll be surprised, like there are thousands of people out there just like you that are 2 steps behind, struggling with a problem you've already solved. But if you don't start posting a thought a day, like they're never going to find you. And to me, like the best part about like writing online is it gives life meaning, right? Like you have a purpose to help other people. And I feel like a lot of people will be a lot happier if they just start helping the person they used to be in public. And when you attract all those opportunities and the audience, like that's the path to freedom, right? So it'd have to be that, man. And obviously I pick writing, but a thought a day online and just see what happens.
Brilliant advice. At It's Kieran Drew on Twitter. Anywhere else you would like to send people to connect with you further?
KieranDrew.com is cool as well. So if you're interested in kind of strategies and frameworks around business, I mainly just say what I'm up to and what works and what doesn't. I don't really like to tell you what to do. Come sign up for Digital Freedom there.
Dude, thank you so much for spending the time here today. I'm so excited to continue watching the journey and keep going, man. You're crushing.
Likewise, dude. Cheers.